Hey, I just wanted to take a few minutes to explain how the Pro Adjuster works and what it does and how it can help many different people. Just a little history behind it. The technology comes from NASA. The chip that's actually in this little solenoid, the computer chip, actually was embedded in the shell of the shuttle. And as the shuttle launched, what the chip's responsibility was to actually measure the movement of the shell of the shuttle. This way they could have countermeasures to stop the shuttle from collapsing on itself. They had to know exactly in split second how much pressure was being pushed in so that they could have countermeasures to press back out. Basically, they took that technology and applied it to human use. They said, if we can look at the movement of the shell of the shuttle, why can't we look at the movement of human joints? And that's how it came about. Basically, what we do is we actually take, I'm going to use a plastic spine because we can't really bring a patient in here and you can't really see what's going on unless you're actually looking at the spinal column. We actually take the solenoid, and what it's going to do is it's going to actually show the actual movement of the joints right on the computer screen. Because of the anatomy, if you look closely at the anatomy, there is a concavity in the facet below, and the facet above is convex. So it comes together, you have a convex-concave relationship, and as a result of the concavity and the convexity, what happens is the joint actually moves within that concave-convex relationship. Now, the only thing they've done is they flipped the image over on the computer screen, and you'll be able to see the actual individual segments, how they move. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually take this and I'm going to place it right over top of the facets. And when we place it over top of the facets, we put about 12 pounds of pressure, and as we press in, what will happen is it will actually produce an image on a computer screen as we go down the spinal column. And what it's actually doing is it's looking at the actual movement of each of those segments as we go down. Now, when it does this, it's actually taking 4 different measurements. It's taking a fixation measurement, which is a measure of how locked up the joint is. It's taking a mobility movement or reading to tell whether the joint's moving too little or too much, or whether it's moving normally. It's taking a frequency reading, which tells us whether the bone is dense or not dense. And there's different conditions that can create density issues with the bone, such as like a bone tumor or osteoporosis. And then the 4th reading is motoricity. And actually, if you look closely, if we go to this screen, you'll see each one of these. It actually has fixation, mobility, frequency, and motoricity on each segment. So what it does is it takes the fixation reading, and the way we look at that graphically is by looking at the chart. And what you have is actually have 3 different screens here. You have a frequency screen here that shows up in a bar-shaped graph. You have what we call a summation screen, and basically all that's doing is comparing one joint to the next, and that's color-coded. And then down here we look at the individual segments. Now, the segments here correlate directly with the segments down here. It's just this is showing all together, stacked on top of each other, where the segments below are showing the actual individual segments. When we look at fixation, the higher the curve, the more locked the joint is. And the reason why that's important is the computer uses that reading to determine how hard to drive the joint. It needs to know how hard to drive based on how fixated or how locked the joint is to movement. It uses that reading and it hits as hard as it needs to in order to actually have some net gain movement. The second reading is mobility. And mobility, basically, the way we tell that graphically is where the curve falls within the box. If the curve is over to the left, it's moving too little. If the curve is over to the right, it's moving too much. If the curve is right in the center, it's moving the way it should be. we pick the worst 3 segments, and from that, the computer calculates how hard, based on fixation, when to stop hitting based on mobility. The speed in which it hits is based on the frequency, and motoricity is the appropriateness of the movement. So it knows how hard, how fast, and how deep to hit. And every time it hits, it's recalculating how that joint's moving. When the joint's moving the best it can, it automatically shuts off. I love it. It's idiot-proof chiropractic. It's the perfect movement every time based on the individual person's movement. The second thing that we can do, and that's basically based on specifically what the person needs. There's another thing that this machine will also do, is it can work through what is called protocols. And protocols are basically based on conditions, condition specific, and it's not patient specific. So anybody that comes in with, say, with headaches, it will actually go through different things. It will show me exactly which tip to use, where this would be the spinal tip, and this would be for the headache protocol. And then we hit right along the vertex of the skull exactly the way it shows to hit. We just know from experience that different protocols work very good with certain conditions. There are many different protocols on this. Headaches is just one of them. For instance, chronic back pain. We can hit along the SI joints or down across the lower back, and that will help with chronic back conditions. Even TMJ, temporal mandibular joint syndrome. And we've actually had referrals from dentists with patients that they've had problems with TMJ, and with this particular protocol, we use a larger tip and go right over the TMJ in order to get the TMJ moving properly again. There are many different protocols that we can pick from to help different conditions. The main thing is we want to be specific for the patient's condition, or specific for how their spinal column is moving, and correct it based on what the patient needs, based on their readings. But we also want to be concerned about if there's conditions that maybe will respond very well to protocols. We'll use a protocol. We have people that swear by the headache protocols, the TMJ. We have them come in every month for these different types of treatment.